I want to move on to talk a bit about the war in Gaza. I feel in the past week or so, we've seen probably some of the most obscene reactions of the war so far, but you might disagree. There's been so much craziness. But, you know, we had the release of 4 hostages, a joyous event, surely, in anyone's eyes. And yet many of the left around the world have decided that that was effectively a war crime. I mean, Jake, what have you made of that?
Well, I mean, just when you think the international media and the international left couldn't get more depraved, they surprise you again. And I think that this was a case of such blatant moral inversion. I mean, it was just so obvious. It was so audacious. You know, the moral inversion with which the left received the news of the hostage release was almost as audacious as the raid itself. Yeah, intellectually, but in an entirely different moral direction. Because, you know, Hamas started this war, seized these hostages, placed them in densely populated civilian areas. Nuseirat, it was next to a market, next to a mall. In narrow alleyways, very, very densely populated, because they wanted that to act as a deterrent to Israel to do this sort of rescue, and then hoped that there would be some kind of human sacrifice involved that would provoke exactly this response from the left. Israeli forces went in extremely cleverly and clinically and responsibly, carried out this stunning rescue, and then came under fire by Hamas in this residential area with RPGs. With RPGs, with automatic fire, regardless of the fact they were surrounded by civilians. Israel responded. After that, Israel got away, got its hostages free. Hamas put out various messages on its Telegram channels, which showed the kind of panic and humiliation it was experiencing. It made a number of claims. One was that 18 soldiers had been killed. Clearly a load of rubbish. The media didn't pick that up. Yeah. The other was that it's not the Israelis, it was the Americans actually who did this raid because they were too humiliated by it being the Israelis. Yeah. This is something that Israel's Arab enemies have done for years, dating back to 1967. The Egyptians said, it must have been the American military beating us, not the Israelis. Clear, transparent lie. Nobody picked that up. But the third was that there were 275 civilians that were killed, something like that. And the media picked that up because that matches the narrative that the media has, and enabled the media to turn a heroic rescue into an atrocity. And just the depravity of that, and the sort of willful inversion of reality is quite astonishing. In the end, I mean, according to the Israelis, it's about up to 100 dead, including the terrorists. Yeah. And in one of the apartments, there were 30 terrorists who were attacking the Special Forces soldiers. So it's likely that a minority of that 100 were civilians. The civilian casualties are quite small, relatively speaking. How many of them were killed by Hamas's RPGs, we don't know. But it just sort of gives a real sense that the media, the international broadcast media, and the UN and international bodies are militating in favor of Hamas. They are the propaganda wing of Hamas. There's no two ways about it. The UN is institutionally Israelophobic, bringing out report after report accusing Israel of the most outrageous crimes that are out of all touch with reality. And the media are doing the same thing. The most appalling thing of all of this is that that's why Hamas is sacrificing its own civilians. Yeah. Because it knows that as soon as it does that, the media will back it up. And as soon as the media and the UN and so on backs it up, then there'll be a huge amount of intense pressure on Israel to stop the war. And that's their only chance of success. And so it's the media are complicit in the human sacrifice strategy of Hamas. The media has blood on its hands.
It's this absolutely kind of grotesque, sort of feedback loop, isn't it? And exactly. I think one of the things that you see more and more, if you watch any reporting on the war, for instance, it's just the way that Hamas are invisibilized almost. Yeah. It's like they don't even exist. You think, who is Israel fighting this war against? Just don't like those civilians. They're going to take them out for some reason.
And why were Israel compelled to go into that area in the first place? I have found it really grotesque, as you say, that contrast between a claimed concern about the loss of civilian life, the horrible loss of civilian life in Gaza, and yet, as you say, a willful blindness to who put those civilians in harm's way in the first place. If you want to talk about October 7th and actually, starting this war, or actually purposely putting these hostages amongst the civilian population in order to effectively use their own civilians as human shields. The fact that this has come out in the course of a week as well, where the Wall Street Journal has got its hands on some of the kind of secret messages being passed around Hamas from Yahya Sinwar, the military leader in Gaza, who refers to Palestinian civilians as, I think the exact words were, necessary sacrifices to the course of actually prolonging this conflict so that Hamas would be in a much more favourable position, first of all, to claim ownership over the Palestinian cause, as they would see it, and also to effectively create enough support, sympathy, whatever, amongst Western publics and officials and leadership, so that they would potentially be able to get themselves out of this conflict still intact. So the fact that they almost have to kind of tune out any of this information and any of the evidence of their own eyes, basically, if you look at what's been going on there. I mean, it's been a constant feature of this conflict, but nothing seems to shake them out of it, I suppose. And
it seems that Hamas has been pushing back on this US brokered ceasefire deal as well. I mean, again, if you go to any march in London, the call is, I suppose, for an Israeli ceasefire. Maybe they don't want Hamas to stop firing on Israel. I mean, what do you make of that, Jake?
Well, I mean, you're right. I heard it reported on a BBC bulletin this morning on the Today programme. Hamas officials have said that their counter demands are fully responsible. The Americans have said they're not. I mean, this shouldn't be a he said, she said, who knows what the truth is. You've got you wouldn't do that with the Islamic State. Islamic State officials have said, and the American version is this, and who knows who's right. If you look at the Hamas demands, they include counter demands. They include a full Israeli withdrawal and an end to the war.
Yeah.
That's what they want. They want it's basically an Israeli surrender. That's what we want. And why is Hamas emboldened to make such maximalist demands, which torpedo any kind of hostage deal or ceasefire deal, really? It's because it feels that it's winning.
Yeah.
And the leaked messages that you mentioned that the Washington Post unearthed from Yahya Sinwar, he said that something like, we've got them where we want them. Why? Because Hamas has managed to weaponize international opinion and the international organizations and the international diplomacy and the international media and the international student body on campuses and the hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of London and other capitals week after week. All those people have been mobilized in the favor of Hamas. And what Hamas not unreasonably is calculating is that before it is totally destroyed, Israel's hands will be tied. It will be forcibly constrained, whether by the US not sending arms, whether by the International Court of Justice or whatever. And then all Hamas needs to do is survive the onslaught. And then that's a victory for Hamas because it begins to rebuild and plan the next October the 7th. There's one final thought just on what you were saying about the Hamas strategy of human sacrifice. There are roughly, or were, 300 miles of tunnels or something in Gaza. During the Blitz and in Ukraine, the public takes refuge underground in the underground systems, in the tubes or wherever. Every single one of the 2.2 million citizens of Gaza could fit in those tunnels underground. Not a single one of them has been admitted into those tunnels. There's not a single bomb shelter built for civilians in the entirety of Gaza. That alone should be so obvious to the media that it should inform the way in which it reports it. Sadly, not.